It feels good to be back doing the podcast again. Welcome back, everybody. Of course, I'm Nicholas Doucette, the host of Unbashful. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me here today. And first, we are going to address where I've been for those of you who are wondering, why it's been so long since I've done an episode here on the channel. And for quite a few reasons, actually, all good reasons. Nothing catastrophic, nothing problematic is going on in my life. I've just been working on a lot of things, and I'm going to get into more detail as to what those things are. But I think the last time I uploaded a podcast was August 3rd, and it's August 31st today. So it's pretty much been an entire month, and I've never gone this long without doing a podcast. I like to consistently try my very best to upload at least once a week, but of course life gets in the way. And sometimes that doesn't always happen. But for the most part, I always upload around 3 to 4 podcasts a month, ideally. But this month, there was basically nothing. And the reason behind that is pretty much because I shot my first short film, which I am very, very proud of. It's not finished, and I'm not going to talk too much about it in detail. The short film was called Known, and the kind of surface level plot I'll give you guys without spoiling anything is that it is about a toxic relationship coming to an end. That's all I'll say in regards to the plot of the film. As to how it comes to an end, you'll have to wait and see. And this project pretty much required all of my time. I wrote the script for it about, I want to say, a month and a half ago. I wrote the first draft, showed it to a couple people, wanted to get some outside eyes to let me know, is it good? Is it dog shit? You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, I am pretty much an amateur when it comes to this stuff. I've never written a script before, but this is the first time I've ever actually sat down in front of my laptop, thought about an idea, manifested it from idea to paper. So it was a very long experimental process, but it was fun. It was fulfilling, is the best way I can put it. And I obviously, I went through several different rewrites, and then I had to find people that wanted to donate their time to do it with me, because of course this feature film, it's not being financed by anybody. We're not making any money off of it. So I had to find people that were passionate about doing this and that were willing to do it, knowing that there was going to be, no financial monetary gain for them. It was just going to be for the sole purpose of a passion project, is pretty much what it came down to. And I was able to collaborate with some lovely, very, very talented people. And we shot pretty much the bulk of the film a couple days ago. We have a couple more things we have to shoot actually today after I'm done this podcast. But we're basically done shooting it. Of course, editing is a whole other beast that we'll have to take care of, and we're definitely going to take our time with that. So I'd say the short film will probably be done around, I'd say, towards the end of the month. Maybe longer, maybe earlier. I'm not really. It's kind of hard to gauge. Like I said, this is all new to me. This is my first short film I've ever shot, and I've ever crafted entirely. So this is all kind of a learning experience for me. But I had such a great time. I don't want to oversell this. This isn't some, big budget blockbuster. This is very much a small independent project. However, I am still very proud with how it went. We worked our asses off. We rehearsed weeks in advance. Even myself on my own time, I'd be at my day job and I would literally be, I'm surprised they didn't fire me, to be honest with you. I would be literally sitting there reading my lines for my script, just memorizing it over and over and over, trying to get into the mind of the character. Of course, I wrote the character, so I know who the characters are. But just I'll save the long-winded soliloquy, and I'll just tell you that we worked very, very hard on this project. And once we are on the latter half of editing and we're almost done it, I will share more details. I'll actually show some more footage. But we are definitely going to take our time editing the short film. I don't know if I already said this a couple of minutes ago. It's called Known. That's basically what it's called. Not basically, that is what it's called. It's called Known. And so that's basically what I've been doing for the last 4 weeks. Just been working very diligently, very focused. And I thought about doing some podcasts in between here and there, but I was just locked in. And that's really, the short film was the only thing that I cared about. Because like I said, I wrote it, I starred in it, whatever you want to call me, a producer for it, sure. I didn't direct it though. I found a very talented, aspiring director who was fortunate enough to collaborate on this with me. And then one of my good friends, Zach, who's an incredibly talented photographer. I got him on to be my cinematographer for the short film, and then I through a mutual friend of mine, I came across this very talented aspiring actress named Tara Hawley, and I spoke to her. She did this film with us too, and it went very, very well. And it was honestly, I know I built it up at this point. I've made it seem like it's something crazy. I don't want to overblow this, like, I didn't do this for the sake of getting people to watch it. I did it because, honestly, for a couple of reasons. A, because I'm an aspiring actor, right? I want to make things. And this is sort of the route that I want to create things. So that's one reason why I did it. But also for my mental health. Also, it's so good creating something. You feel this immense amount of fulfillment and productivity, and it's a really good feeling. Even if this thing turns out to be the worst thing, that's like worse than The Room by Tommy Wiseau, which I don't think it will be, but I'm just saying, like, I really don't, obviously I care about what the end result of this is going to be, but just going through the process, writing the script, rehearsing with everybody, talking to my director, talking to my center, like, all of that was just creating this, actually shooting this, hitting roll, getting the clapper board we ordered on Amazon. Literally, like, we were in rehearsal and we were like, yo guys, we should probably get a clapper board, make it kind of official, have that little, that little thing that kind of signifies that, okay, we're actually doing this. We literally ordered that the day before we were about to shoot, and it just came in the mail, thankfully, to Amazon Prime. But yeah, I'll cut it there. I could go on about this forever, and I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to build this thing up to be like, this is going to be the best, short film since sliced bread. I am very proud of it. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. I'll say this, I loved creating this podcast, and similar to the podcast, when I started this podcast, I felt a great sense of productivity and fulfillment. I like working hard. Not to sound like one of these, these people that just love to push this sort of grind mentality of, never sleep, work all day. I'm not one of those people, but I do enjoy working hard, and I do enjoy creating things. And I felt those same feelings creating the podcast, but I felt something different when we shot this short film. The sense of fulfillment and just like being like, just making something. It's a lot of fun, and it feels great. And I could go on about this for hours, but I'm sure in the future I'll talk about it more in detail. I'll actually get into more details of what the plot is about. I mean, it is a short film. It's probably only going to be around, I'd say 10 to 15 minutes long, but I'm very, very excited to share more. But I'll leave it there. That's what I've been doing this whole month. Just shooting the short film, working on it diligently, and also doing a couple things in the background for this podcast as well. I haven't made any episodes of this podcast. Obviously, like I said, the last time I did this was August 3rd, but I've been doing some rebranding on the side because we'll get into that in the next topic. But yeah, so that's where I've been this whole time. So I kind of, teased about what we were going to talk about next, and we're going to talk about the podcast. We're going to talk about some things that I've been working on in the background for it. First of all, today is August 31st, and that day is significant for a pretty big reason, because the first episode of this podcast that I uploaded, my introduction episode, came out this day last year. So it's been officially 1 year that Unbashful has existed amongst the vast pool of other podcasts. And I've done a lot of reflecting, and this year blew by. It feels like yesterday that I sat down, I started thinking about what am I going to talk about? What's the name? Like, that was similar to the short film, that was a very exciting process, kind of creating this whole thing. And it's crazy that a year has already passed. Now, just kind of looking back, it's been a wild process. Look, I'm not delusional. I understand that this podcast is still pretty much like an ant compared to all the other successful podcasts out there. And I'm okay with that. And I'm not trying to say I'm satisfied with where I'm at. Absolutely not. I plan on continuing to build this thing for years to come. Years while I'm pursuing acting. This is going to be something that I continue to do. So I am no way, shape, or form trying to say that I'm satisfied with having 82 subscribers. Absolutely not. I definitely plan on continuing to build this, but basically what my point is that I am proud of, what I've done so far with it. The amount of episodes I've done, the content I've talked about, how I've changed as a person because of this, the impact this has had on me. It's been great, and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. You're gonna see my face here as long as you'll continue to watch. I'm gonna be around here for a very long time, so you can bet on that. And I'm excited to keep making content and continuing to talk about movies. Now I'm gonna get into some things like what I've learned, things that like I said, how this has impacted me. Let's kind of address that first. Before I did this podcast, I had talked about doing a podcast in general. I had talked about that for a pretty long time. I talked about doing it with a couple of my friends. That didn't really work out. But overall, the idea of making a podcast, getting myself involved in fandom and just getting sort of involved in this online community, making my own stuff, producing my own content, has something that I've sort of fantasized about. And fantasize is kind of the wrong word. Something that I've just sort of kind of contemplated doing for so long. But I just never did it. I always kind of discouraged myself from saying like, I'd have to do this, I'd have to buy this, I'd have to buy that. And I created so many different obstacles. It was basically this ultra form of procrastination. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I wanted to do was possible, but instead of, putting my foot down and saying like, okay, I'm actually going to do this, I created roadblocks just with my overall perspective. I made it, I built it up on this pedestal to where I was like looking at it like I was 100 feet below it, and I was thinking like, okay, what I want to do is up here, and I gotta do this, I gotta do that, and I built it up. I made it seem like it was this gargantuan thing, and finally that changed when I sat down and I just started to brainstorm. I just started to brainstorm ideas. I started to brainstorm. I went through several different names of what this podcast was going to be. I was originally going to call it Unapologetic. I was going to call it, what were some other names? Fuck, I can't even remember. Unapologetic was one that I was dead set on. I was like, this is it. This is perfect. And then I searched up Unapologetic, and there's like 90 other podcasts with that same name. So I was like, well, fuck, I can either contribute to this, pool of hundreds of other people that have the same podcast name and barely even stick out, or I go back to the drawing board. I try to figure out something unique, and Unbashful was a name that I came across. It reflected a lot of different ideas and things that I was passionate about. Basically, the word unbashful in and of itself basically just means like you do not take shame, and it's not that you don't take shame in your behavior. You don't take shame in some of the things that you say. And of course you could look at that from a negative light, saying like, oh, you can just say whatever the fuck you want and not take shame in it. Obviously not. I just mean like it more or less, the idea of being unbashful to me refers to the idea of just like saying how you feel and being passionate about it and not letting anybody kind of dictate or discourage you from wanting to do things. Just having an unbashful personality, being a trailblazer, trying to, kind of write your own path. That was sort of the idea of creating this podcast, creating this name, having my own opinions basically is what it comes down to. Just saying how I feel. Now, of course, like I said, there's a fine line you need to walk on. If you're saying something that's objectively wrong, well, then that's another level. But if you just have your own opinion about something, and for lack of a better term, you don't give a fuck about what other people think about that opinion, that was sort of the mantra and the idea with the name Unbashful. And that's sort of what it was with Unapologetic. But as I mentioned, there was like hundreds of other podcasts that had that same name. So it just didn't work. And I didn't find a single podcast with this name. So it was unique to me. I think even before that, I was going to call this thing my name. But I mean, we've seen hundreds of other people do that too. Of course, Joe Rogan, the John Campea show, this show, that show, whatever. You know what I mean. So it's hard when you're trying to, it's definitely challenging when you're trying to enter a saturated market like podcasting, like internet media. You have to find some way to kind of separate yourself. And of course, there's a couple obvious ways to do that. A, your personality. It's very common, and I'll admit to a degree, I did this a little bit as well. When you first start doing something creative, many people have imposter syndrome. You're just trying to be like all your heroes, all the people that you've looked up to, which is it's a natural thing to do, but eventually that kind of fizzles out and you sort of find your own identity and you find your own niche. And that's sort of what happened with me. I was going into this thinking, I didn't really know exactly what I was going to talk about when I made this podcast. I kind of decided I'm going to take this sort of Joe Rogan approach, and I'm going to interview people, and I'm going to just, talk about whatever's sort of trending in the media, right? So there was never really a niche. I kind of just looked at the Joe Rogan blueprint, and I basically said, well, I'm going to copy that for more or less. And that just didn't really work out. I got a couple months in, and I was like, I'm not really talking about anything in particular that I really care about. And I kept circling back to the content that I watched and the content that I wanted to see, which was basically all about film, cinema. That's what I love. That's what, not to sound cringy, but that's what gets me out of bed. And I thought, fuck it. Why don't I talk about what I actually know instead of trying to put on this pretentious sort of, mask of trying to be like, not trying to be Joe Rogan in terms of his personality. Like I wasn't trying to adopt the way, like his behavior. I just mean in terms of the format of how he actually produced and made his content. I basically threw that out the window. I said, fuck that. I'm just going to talk about what I love, and that's movies. And that's sort of how I slowly found my niche for this podcast. And now, with the rebranding that I've done that you guys will see very shortly, and I think actually, I don't know for sure, but I think by the time I upload this podcast, I think I will include the new intro for it. The whole rebranding I'm going to be doing with the show here is going to very much reflect the movies, because now that's the niche. That's what I've found enjoyment in talking about, right? I'm not a very political individual. I'm not going like, I had a very lovely young lady come on the show named Mary Rose Amaro, who's a fantastic person, and I'm sure she's going to achieve amazing, great heights. And I brought her on the show to talk about politics. And that was sort of a very educational sort of episode for me. And don't get me wrong, when I say I'm not a political person, I care about what's going on politically, but I'm not someone that, pays as much attention to it. I probably should. Objectively, I'm an adult now. I think these things are definitely important. But I brought her on to try and learn a thing or two. And I definitely did. And I loved having her on. But the whole, sort of where I'm going with this is like, I was trying too hard to do the sort of informal, different topic each episode kind of Joe Rogan approach. And that works for him. That's successful for him. That's why he's arguably the most successful person in this, lane of entertainment. So hats off to him. But and it's not even just like this in podcasting. If you're going to try and emulate or do something that somebody else is doing, their way, it's not, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to work for you. You could take inspiration for sure, but trying to just sort of, like I said, it goes back to the imposter syndrome. It's just not going to work out. And I learned that for myself. And you know what? Do I regret starting my podcast off that way? No, because I fell on my face a couple times. I failed. You got to fail. You got to fuck up. You got to make a couple mistakes to kind of clear the blinders and think that, okay, this is what I want to do, right? And that's sort of what happened with me. I talked about some things I didn't really give a fuck about, but it all came back to movies. It all came back to when I talk about movies and I talk about film and television and show business, this is something that, lights me up. It makes me feel good. I enjoy talking about it. It gives me a chance to get involved in the fandom. So that's when I sort of found my niche. And like I said this earlier, this is an oversaturated market. It doesn't matter what sector. It doesn't matter if you watch podcasts that are about golfing, sports, random things like, I don't know, furniture, technology, movies, whatever. There are millions of people that have already kind of made their own thing. So I know that I'm amongst a vast amount of people that talk about movies, but I have my own sort of approach, my own personality that makes me unique. And I think everybody should kind of sort of, take that approach going into it. You know that you're not going to be the, hot shit. And if you're going into this, specifically podcasting, if there's any of you that are thinking about getting into this, the only sort of, some advice I'll kind of give is you really have to be patient with this. And I know that advice could be adopted across many different creative spaces, but podcasting specifically, it's a long-term game. It takes a very, very long time. As I mentioned, I have under 100 subscribers. Most of my videos only get a couple hundred views, but you can't let that discourage you. You have to just ride the wave, right? You have to just continue working hard. Of course, always trying to make changes, right? You have to look at yourself objectively, and you have to say, okay, what I'm doing, is it working? Is it not working, right? You have to kind of remove your ego, and you have to look at yourself and say, okay, clearly nobody gives a fuck about this. Let me change this. Let me do this. But at the end of the day, don't ever change who you are when you're trying to make content, because that is what's going to attract people. That is what's going to bring in eventually the audience that's going to stick with you for years to come. That's the best advice I can give with you. Don't change who you are. Don't try to change your personality to mold and try to be somebody else, because that's just not going to work out, right? And I know what I'm saying isn't like, I'm not explaining the Deutsch proposition here. This is something that I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard from these, motivational speakers. I'm just telling you from my own experience. So that's the advice I would give for people looking to get into this specifically podcasting. It's a fun gig. It's really not that hard to start up. I think I probably spent around, I want to say $300 to $400 to really start this up, to buy the mic. Luckily, when I bought this mic right here, this is a Yeti, a Blue Yeti microphone. I bought it in sort of a package that came with not only the mic, but it came with the boom arm and everything else. So that was great. And then, of course, I had to buy a camera. Right now, though, you're actually watching this through my iPhone. I just got a new iPhone, the iPhone 13, and I have significantly more storage on this phone. So I thought, fuck it, let me try recording an episode on here, seeing how it looks compared to my camera over here. The camera I have over there, it's not that great, and probably, within the next 6 months, I will try to get a better camera, because I can't shoot on my iPhone forever, but I thought I would test out the 4K 60 frames per second camera. But it's really an inexpensive, thing to do. I mean, you don't even have to spend money on a, Yeti microphone. Eventually you will need to get some kind of gear, because you want people to take you seriously. You want people to, and eventually I'm in my room right now at my house. Eventually, once I'm successful enough and I make enough money that I can actually afford to, I would like to get my own studio. I already kind of have a visualization of how I would like it. Black walls with this sort of very kind of like, when you sort of, I'm stuttering today for some reason. When you go to garage sales and you see old kind of signs that says like Coca-Cola or open, and it's like this kind of neon, red and yellow lighting. I want to have that on a wall, get my own studio, and have it say, of course, Unbashful and stuff like that. So that's very much down the line, but I believe I can do that. I just need to continue to work hard, stay focused, stay dedicated, and I truly believe in manifestation. I really do. I think, I heard Israel Adesanya say this the other day. He's a UFC fighter. He said he believes that everything comes from the imagination. He actually was saying, he was speaking into, I think he was on a podcast. He literally pointed at the mic and he said, somebody thought about this. Somebody thought about creating something that would amplify your voice, and then they made this. So I very much share that same kind of belief in sort of manifestation. I think if you really want something, if you're really dedicated and you're focused and you're able to kind of look at yourself and kind of analyze, what are you doing that could stop you from doing this, eliminating self-destructive behavior. Like, I basically don't play video games anymore. I cut that shit out of my life just because that was distracting me. So being able to do that takes a lot of willpower. But if you can do it, it's one of the greatest feelings in the world. And really just kind of sitting down and creating something. But yeah, so that was a mouthful. And usually I write notes, and I do have some notes here, but these are pretty much just headlines. Now, I don't want to get notes confused with a script. I never write a script because that would defeat the purpose of what a podcast is. The podcast is all kind of off the top of the head. You're just kind of talking, just in verbal diarrhea, essentially, right? But I do like to have topics that I like to base what I'm saying off of. And I usually kind of write a few bullet points, things I know that I want to talk about that I don't want to miss. And this is pretty much like I wrote all my topics here, and then I sort of like little subtext below. I would just write just whatever comes first in your mind. So yeah. But yeah, let's talk about the next topic here in regards to the podcast. So I've mentioned a couple times that I'm going to be rebranding the podcast. It's going to maintain a lot of the same. Sorry if you're wondering what that sound just was. I cracked my knuckles. For those of you that are listening. Anyway, so it's going to maintain the identity of Unbashful that I've had this whole time, but now the brand of my show is going to actually signify to people watching or people that stumble across the podcast that, oh, I talk about movies, right? Because when I first started the podcast, the original logo that I had and that I've had this whole time up until this point has been the red mic with the Unbashful text to the left with the 3 lines in the top left corner, of course, signifying that somebody's speaking into the mic. But nothing in that tells people that I talk about movies. And to be fair, as I mentioned earlier, when I first started the podcast, I didn't even know that movies is going to be the main sort of thing that I talked about anyway. So I guess I have to kind of cut myself some slack there. But through at that time, I found my niche. So I got to make some changes. And also, you can't stay stagnant in really anything in life, in any sort of industry. You have to constantly be looking to improve. You need to constantly look to make changes in areas that could use improvement. And branding is definitely one of those. Marketing is definitely one of those. I really don't like social media. And to be quite frank, if I had the money, I would pay somebody to run my social media for me, to be sort of my Instagram, whatever, social media manager, if you will. But unfortunately, I'm not there yet, so I got to continue to do that solo. And everything's solo. I basically run this whole thing. I do run this whole thing on my own. And I definitely need to market this podcast a lot better, and I need to change the logo, some branding, and that's what I've done. And that's what you saw when you watched this video. When you clicked play on YouTube, that's the whole intro that you saw in the beginning. That's different from what it was previously. And that's a change, like I said, to kind of, now that I've found my niche, I've found I've found what I've wanted to talk about. God, I have no idea why I'm stuttering so much today. It's weird if you don't do something like this for a while. Like, you're just speaking, but it's like, the muscles and kind of like your throat, you need to kind of reignite them, you know what I mean? Get, clear off the rust. Because I mean, other than this podcast, I don't talk this much on a day-to-day basis, right? But none of this is an act. I mean, anybody that knows me, I'm not changing the inflection of my voice. This is very much how I speak. But I don't talk this much, normally. But yeah, I don't even know where I just lost my train of thought. Branding. So I've changed the logo. So now I'll post on my Instagram and a couple other places. So in case you do look for Unbashful and you can't find it, you don't recognize it anymore, it's because I've changed the logo. So I'll post that on my story. And I've thought about doing that for a while. And even this logo that I have now, eventually it will change again. Probably I'll kind of like this. I'll try it for a year, see how it goes. If I feel beforehand that it needs to change again, I'm not going to try and change it too much, because then it's, if I don't have a consistent identity, it's going to be hard for people to, want to, it's going to be hard for audience members to sort of want to stick around, right? But, every couple of years or so, I will try and, look at it and, try and see if there's any ways I could change it. But now I'm very happy and I'm very proud of, the sort of branding changes I've made, because now it actually kind of relates to film and it relates to movies and theaters and cinema. But I'm very much looking forward to that. And there was a couple other things I wanted to talk about. I can't even. Where do I go from here? From here, I'm just going to continue to create content, work hard. I'm going to try and get some people on the podcast to talk, some movies, of course. But I can't promise anything. Trying to get somebody on the show is very difficult because, like I said, I don't make any money off this. And of course, if people want to spend their time doing something, they want to be rewarded for it. So if anybody were to come on this show, I'd have to, see if they'd want to do it voluntarily, right? So it is challenging. And, I don't blame people, right? If they're going to dedicate a couple hours to come speak to me on a podcast, I don't blame them for feeling, for trying to negotiate money. But of course, I just can't do that right now. So it is going to be tough finding a guest. So, don't expect any guests anytime soon. But I will try and, speak to some people that I know, some friends of mine, see if they want to come on the show. I've had a couple guests in the past, but like I said, once again, those are just friends, people I knew through other people, stuff like that. I will try and reach out to some people and see if they'd be interested in coming on Unbashful. I think once, I've already talked to my director, I don't know for sure if this is going to happen, but I think once our short film, Known, is fully completed, like it's ready to go on YouTube, it's edited, it's in the can, then I think I'll bring him on, and we'll just do a whole episode talking about that whole process and how that went. But yeah, the final thing I will leave with you all here before we wrap up today's episode, because I've pretty much talked about everything. For those of you that are in your 20s, like myself, I'm 22, and you're feeling lost and you're feeling like you don't, you're not on one main path. You don't feel like you know what you want to do in terms of an occupation. You're going through struggles and whatnot. Let me tell you, I've been there, right? And it's never good to tell somebody, I understand what you're going through. That's never good to say. So I never try and say that to people, because everybody has individual, unique experiences. But I've been through my own personal, navigation troubles in terms of life. And I've, even to this day, sometimes I feel lost. I feel like, sometimes doubt can creep in your mind. It's natural sometimes. We don't want to get doubt, because doubt is the killer of art. And I don't have nearly as much doubt as I used to. But basically, for what I'm trying to say, to make sense of what I'm saying, so I'm not just like... if you feel like you're lost and you feel like you don't have the answers, that's okay. That is okay. And you need to just, whatever you're doing right now, keep going, because eventually the answers will reveal themselves. Eventually you will find something that will click. You will find something, a light will go off in your brain, and you'll think, okay, this is what I need to do. I need to change this. I need to do that. Those answers will reveal themselves organically, naturally. Don't try and artificially kind of figure it out like, Johnny's doing this, so I want to do this too. And the biggest thing I can give to you, because I've dealt with this myself, don't give a fuck about what's going on with everybody else, with everybody else's life, okay? It's good to be competitive. It's good to kind of, you definitely want, it's good to have some sense of competition, but everybody has their own trajectory of life. And social media definitely fucks us up for people. It makes it hard for people because they see people throwing millions of dollars around, or people that locally, they're off doing this and that. Be happy for them, sure. And I've dealt with this sort of envy myself. I used to be the kind of person that I would talk a lot of bullshit. I would talk, oh, I'm going to do this and that, and I would never do it. I'm going to start this. I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to start this project. I would never do it. And I would feel resentment towards other people that I knew because they were doing something cool and they were popping off. They were doing great, and I'd kind of be like an asshole about it. I'd be like, whatever. I'd feel resentment, and it that does you no good. Don't be one of those people. Don't be one of those people. I was one of those people. I was one of those people that I looked down on those people that were trying to do something, right? Or, if somebody was already really successful, I would let that stop me. I would let that make me feel insecure. And you can't let that happen to you because that will stop you from navigating and following your personal compass. And you pretty much, I'm having a hard time articulating this, but I think most people probably know where I'm getting at. You have to just continue doing what you're doing, and you have to follow your path. And like I said, eventually, the dust will kind of fade out, and you'll find the writing on the wall. You'll find these are terrible fucking analogies that I'm using, but it is okay. This is the decade. This is the part of our lives where we can experiment. Try things. See what works, see what doesn't. I'm still doing that myself. I don't want to sound like I'm this like prophet that has all the answers. I don't. I'm still in the thick of it myself. But I've figured out some things along the way, and through some reflection and through some growth, these are the things that I've learned for myself. So don't look down on people. Don't be a dick. Don't be condescending. And don't try and copy other people. Do you, and don't worry about, don't look at it as a race, right? The old mantra of it's not a marathon, it's not a race, it's a marathon. I think that's how it goes. It is very much a marathon. This is a long-term game of life. Don't try and get too high, don't try and get too low, because things will knock you the fuck down, things will bring you up. You just kind of have to stay balanced. But anyways, if I go any longer, I'm going to sound like a jackass, and I'm going to sound like these, pretentious motivational speakers, and that's not what I'm here for. That's not what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to cut it here. That's all the life advice I'm going to give today. If you enjoyed this, I would really appreciate if you leave a like and a thumbs up. Let's push us through the algorithm, hopefully. I don't know why I said that. But yeah, anyway, so next week, regular programming. I'm going to be talking about movies. There's a lot of things going on. Fantastic Four director just got announced, Matt Shackman, and a whole bunch of other things. I'm going to do some movie reviews. I'm probably going to start doing this. I'll have to figure out the schedule and whatnot, but I'm going to try and talk about older films. Now, when I say older, I don't mean like, really old, like 1920s, like silent pictures, but like some kind of, films that are like 10 to 20, 30 year old films that I've been watching that I've really, really enjoyed. Like, I think at some point I do want to talk about a movie called There Will Be Blood with Daniel Day-Lewis, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. I'm just starting to kind of get familiar with his work. He's an incredibly talented filmmaker. And I've really never seen much of his films. And after watching that, I'm going to start kind of digging through his filmography and checking out films like Phantom Thread. Now, I've seen a couple of his other films in the past, but yeah, so I'm going to try and talk about some more kind of classic films. Don't worry, I'm still going to talk about the regular stuff, comic book films, stuff like that I'm passionate about doing, out of theater reactions, and the normal stuff that you guys see on this channel. But yeah, so I'm back. I'm good. Everything's fine. Made a short film, so that's why I haven't been around here for a while, but I'm excited to continue forward, and I got a lot of big goals, a lot of big ambitions, and if you guys want to join me for the ride, I'd love to have you here on Unbashful. And stay safe, everybody. Have a great night, and I'll see you on the next one.